This is Christie Nelson, and this is the story behind the story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hahn,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Christie Nelson.
Well, happy spring, everybody, and welcome to the Author Stories Podcast. If you go to hankgarner.com, we've got a new site design I think you're going to like. It's easier to dig through all the archives of the show. And as always, there's a little search box on the right-hand side and a box where you can sort them in a long list, and you can find an author interview that you like. Also, subscribe to the show. There are buttons over there in the right-hand sidebar as well. If you would like to support the show, there is a link in the right-hand sidebar where you can donate to the show. If you'd like to drop something in the Author Stories tip jar, there's also a link in the top sidebar where if you would like to advertise your product or service in the show, you can do that as well. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please click on the Amazon links in the show notes and support the authors that come on, and we do appreciate it. After our great author interview today, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Hey authors, you need an editor in your life, and not just an editor, but an editor that understands you and gets what you're trying to accomplish. That's why you need to visit my good friend Scott Woodley at marlowemoss.net and let him take a look at your work. He'll give you a free sample edit. Scott can help you be the best writer you can be. Visit him at marlowemoss.net. Inspired sentences and polished paragraphs for print-worthy books at competitive rates and always on time. Offering a full range of editorial and ghostwriting services to self-published and traditionally published authors. Turn your ideas into words and see your dreams become books. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Christie Nelson on the show with me. Christie has a brand new book out today called Beautiful Illusion, Treasure Island 1939. What a fantastic book, Christie. Thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, Hank.
Christie, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I knew you were going to ask me that, so I've been thinking about it, and I believe it doesn't happen all at once, or at least it didn't happen for me in a blinding flash. But one of my first memories of wanting to write and wondering how in the world one does that was as a child. And I know that's not surprising because many writers feel that way. I was living in San Francisco. I maybe was 8 or 9 or maybe even 10. And my mom would take me to the library, which was one of my favorite places to go. And then we'd come back laden with books. And at that particular time, I was reading a lot about the pioneers who settled the West. And there I lay on my bed on top of this chenille bedspread with the fog swirling outside the window and the sound of the Chinese wind chime tinkling there in the room. And I just entered another world. So that is my first memory of thinking I would love to be able to write.
Well, Christie, it's so interesting that some people have kind of that flash of lightning moment, but I think what you describe is probably more true for more people, is that we just kind of realize one day that these things have been a part of us, and we start finding avenues for that.
I agree, and but I do have to say that as well as that moment, in my early 20s, I was living in Maine, And I remember I was so homesick for San Francisco that, again, I was overcome with this feeling that I really wanted to tell the story about my hometown. However, I just did not have the tools for the craft, so I reverted to my love of reading, and I also had another love at that time, which I'll tell you about, which is next to writing, I wanted to dance. And I was doing that then, and so it was much easier. It just came. I had been trained somewhat as a dancer, and so I threw myself into dancing.
Do you feel a connection, Christie, between the art form of dancing, which is storytelling all of its own in a different way, but storytelling still the same? Do you feel a connection between that and the writing and storytelling that you do now?
That is such a great question, Hank. I'm really taken with your question because there is a relationship. Although I don't know as much as telling a story with one's body, in the choreography and the movement and such. It's more like I find that the words dance on the page, and there's a rhythm in the language that I relate to.
Absolutely, and I liken songwriting to prose writing a lot because of the when prose really flows, it's almost has a lyrical quality and a rhythm to it. And I was hoping that you would say that dance has that similar. You draw people in and connect with them on an emotional level that it's almost a primal kind of a thing.
I agree, and there is a beat to the language.
Right.
There is, as you say, that rhythm that happens, and I love to play with that, with in sentence structure, and in the sound of the words, and as well as bringing in, of course, sensory detail to kind of assist in that. But most of all, there is a rhythm in the language that I really, when I'm in that groove, I can really feel it.
Right. So when did you? Well, first, how long did you pursue dance?
I pursued it until my late 30s. Into my 40s, and I'll tell you, I was very late coming to writing, although I was reading all the time. On my 50th birthday, I realized if I don't learn how to write now, I never will. So that's when I began a more formal training by taking classes, joining writers groups, going to conferences, and finding a writing group that was essential to moving ahead with my dreams of writing. And thank goodness I did that. You meet so many people who say, they look at you and they say, I always wanted to write a book. And I'm like, well, get those words moving across the page, because writing really is a physical act too, which maybe gets back to the idea of dancing with words.
Right. So what was the catalyst that brought you back to writing?
I think it was the mere fact that I could see that I had reached a milestone. I mean, 50 is it's a wake up moment, I think. And I said, if I don't do this now, I never will. And the other thing is, I think. Here in California, we're, I was going to say we're risk takers. We engage with a lot, and this is not at all to say that this isn't the case in other parts of the country, but we are the left coast, and we don't let much stand in our way. for ill or for gain, we keep going.
So what was that first story idea?
Oh, that's a great question. The first story idea. Well, what I did is I had a friend, and she looked at me, and she was wanting to write as well. So we went up and we took a class with Anne Lamott, which many of your readers or listeners may know. And Anne just she had us right in the moment. She said her instruction was pick a small window and write about it. And so because I was felt like I was putting myself out on the line, I just wrote about the people in that room, and from there I'm just remembering I started writing short stories, which in fact I think is a very difficult form compared to the novel. To write a good short story is really takes a special skill. But I did write a story about a Pony Express writer, which gets back to my, reading all those books about settlers and cowboys and Indians. I wrote a story about it was simply called The Pony Rider, and I imagined him setting off in Nebraska and coming west, and I wrote his name was Greenie Bowman, and that was one of my first story ideas.
Now, you are a native San Franciscan, right?
I am. Born and raised.
And I think I read in your bio, like third generation.
That's right.
So
that's right.
So your fascination with the West, I would think, comes from these deep roots that you have there, and wanting to really understand maybe why your people came there and what is it that anchors a family to a certain place. I love hearing about how the places that we're from influence the things that we do, especially our writing. How do you feel like being a native San Franciscan and a left coaster, as you said? How do you feel like those things are ingrained in your writing and maybe influence the types of stories that you tell?
I think there's no separation from that. The fact that my roots are here in California, and my first two novels were set in Marin County, which is north of San Francisco. And as we're talking today, we're really talking more about Beautiful Illusion,
right?
Set in San Francisco, 1939. And you hit on something, Hank, which is part of my reason for writing Beautiful Illusion was to imagine my San Francisco during my grandparents' time. And there's another added layer to that, which is I did really not, and this is on my dad's side. My dad was born and raised in the city. But on my dad's side, I really did not know my paternal grandparents. He was estranged from them. So in part, you talk about the story behind the story.
Right.
And I have a story behind the story behind the story. Which is a kind of imagining of what San Francisco was like in the 30s and possibly what my grandparents were going through in that turbulent time during the Depression, and as the 30s wound down, the prospect of war. So I think I've lost your original question. It's going off on a tangent.
No, that's the reason I love to get the story behind the stories is because that's where the real truth of the writer comes out, why it is that we dig to get to these stories that we tell. I love to hear the motivations and where things come from. So let's talk about Beautiful Illusion, the brand new book. It's out today. It's Beautiful Illusion, and then right below that you've got subtitled Treasure Island 1939. What is it, and you alluded to this a little bit about wanting to connect with those paternal roots. But what was it about this particular time and place that captured your imagination?
Well, let's see. I got a couple threads to pull through to answer that question.
Okay.
So Treasure Island right now, it resembles just a flat pancake in the middle of the bay. There are not that many buildings on it. And as a child growing up and all through my life, I really did not know what went on there, nor do many people truly remember. Well, not many people remember, but it's kind of like the Lost Fair. There was the Pan Pacific Exposition in San Francisco, in that World's Fair in 1915, and everybody knows that because in part there's a very large building down in the marina, the Palace of Fine Arts, that comes from that building, from that fair, that's been preserved. But getting back to Treasure Island, as you go over the San Francisco-Oakland Bridge, it's to the northwest of the island, and people are just zooming over the bridge and coming back again, of course, but they're not aware of really what went on there. So I was, and I too was questioning. And then there's a program on PBS called The History Detective, and a family had a home, a Japanese-style home in Gilroy. They were curious, where did this house come from? The History Detective traced it back to Treasure Island. And that set me wondering, well, what was a Japanese home or house structure doing on Treasure Island, which led me to what fair there, which is called the Golden Gate International Exposition of 1939.
Well, there's so much to talk about right here. But our country is kind of scattered with these remnants of times gone by, and as urban areas grow more and more, and cities become larger, and expansion and things get built on top of other things, we lose a lot of this history that used to be right in front of us, and it's really a shame. But you can travel all over the country and see these kind of shadows of a time that once was. And another thing that seems to be lost are these giant expos. I can remember as a kid, seeing things about the World's Fair, and those things aren't really a thing anymore, but it used to be a place where people could come and see the future. And those things aren't quite there anymore. So as you started digging, what things did you find about Treasure Island and about this expo that was there that let you know that you were really onto something?
Another great question, Hank. I think you've been doing this for quite a while, huh? Asking penetrating questions. What I found. First of all, Treasure Island is a man-made. Well, let me back up a little bit more. In the beginning of the 30s, both bridges were being built. I believe the Golden Gate Bridge started in I'm going to say 33. At least the plans were underway to build the Golden Gate Bridge as well as the Bay Bridge. And these were monumental structures. Have you ever been to California?
I have not. I've been as far west as Colorado.
Okay. So, the Golden Gate Bridge links San Francisco to the North Bay,
Okay.
Marin, Sonoma. The Bay Bridge links San Francisco to the Oakland East Bay.
Right.
And these were incredible engineering feats. And as this was happening, the city fathers devised the idea, let's celebrate San Francisco as the gateway to the Pacific. We were thriving. We did a lot better than the rest of the country during the Depression. But as the WPA and Roosevelt was underway, the country was being rebuilt, and the city fathers said, we are a major port. We've come back certainly from the Depression, and also the shadow of the '06 earthquake was there as well. So they said, let's have a World Fair. And after much deliberation, it was decided that the island would be built on the shoals in the bay next to Yerba Buena Island. So for the Army Corps of Engineers engaged to dredge mud and silt and bones up from the bay, which they did in record time. They did it in 1 year. And yet at the same time, the idea of the fair was peace and brotherhood in the Pacific. So as well as you mentioned, that the scientific, the features that you featured in these fairs, as well as art and fun and carnival rides and gardens and all these huge events. An invitation was issued to all countries whose borders touch the Pacific to come and build pavilions in the name of peace and brotherhood. And once I started also, there's some wonderful books, of course. Once I started looking at the marvelous architecture, it was fantastical. It was they called it Pacific Basin architecture, and it was Cambodian, it was Mayan, it was just this fantastical, and it was Art Deco. So, and to see the pictures of it, I couldn't believe that every building in the end was really destroyed. That's not entirely true. There's an administration building there and 2 hangars at the back, but otherwise everything was destroyed after the fair. However, the fair did run for 2 years, though not only certain months of the year, and it by the time it closed it opened in February of '39 and ran into 1940, and it was proposed to the people that afterwards the island would become San Francisco Airport, but by then the runways were much too short. At any rate, by the time I looked at the story of the fair itself, I thought, this is a fantastic story.
Well, and what the reason we read stories about these places that we've almost lost is not just for the places, but for the people that live there. And tell us about the characters in Beautiful Illusion, and how do they fit into this time period? And as you started kind of peeling back the layers of this lost time and place, did the characters come naturally to you, or how did you discover them?
Well, now we're sort of getting to the story behind the story.
Right.
So there's the story of the fair itself, and many of the people. There was an architect by the name of Timothy Pfluger, whom I found to be fascinating. He was the head of the design committee. Of course, there were other real people, the Mayor Rossi, and any number of people who lived during that period of time. But I thought, for my purposes, I wanted to develop fictional characters who could carry not only the story of the fair, but each of them had a mission that wasn't necessarily congruent one to the other. And I, of course, wanted a protagonist, and I devised a fictional character by the name of Lily Nordby, who's the newspaper reporter. And she was given the job of reporting on the people of the island. So there was that element. And she was a hometown girl from the wrong side of the tracks who wanted to pull herself up, and she was very plucky and fearless. Then I thought, all right, this is the eve of World War II, and as I was researching, the most popular pavilion on the island was the Japanese Pavilion. And I thought to myself, okay, it's the late 30s. The Japanese are, Imperial Japan was taking its place in world domination, or wanting to take its place in world domination. And indeed, actually in 1939, there were 1 million soldiers in China. And the emperor had joined forces with Hitler and Mussolini. And I thought, the more I thought about it, I thought, well, the diplomat who came over on the ship to build the pavilion had more than diplomacy on his mind. So I devised a fictional Japanese diplomat whom I named Tokido Okamura. And so then I had two characters, and I could play them off of one another. Although I don't know that I said that to myself necessarily, but I knew that they would be contentious with one another initially. But I wanted a third character, and I didn't quite know who that character would be, except I was fascinated with the Mayan architecture on the island. And I've traveled to the Yucatan and have been overwhelmed and delighted by that part of the world. And then there's another thing, Hank, that is a little, I don't know, you know, as one goes through life, they see people whom they don't know, but you carry the picture of that person. And so I saw a man at a play, and he was, I was in Los Angeles at the time, and he was sitting up front, and I kept looking at him. He was very, very handsome, and he had a lot of people around him. And at intermission, he stood up, and he was a dwarf. And I wondered, what would it be like to go through life like that? And so I took the memory of this man and made him my Mayan art expert who came to the island to assist in the design of the building. And to me, and I named him Woodrow Packard, highly educated, an Mayan art expert. And he really is the moral center of the story, in that he observes things that are happening and acts in a truly courageous way, and with great heart as well. So I think I've gone off on this, but that's how those are my three main characters, and they are fictional.
Well, the description of the book says a mixture of fact, fiction, and noir. At what point in the writing of this, and your characters are fictional, but did the lines ever blur for you between these are made up characters, but this is a real place, and did it kind of take a life of its own as the writing began?
You're asking me, did the characters have a life, take on a life of their own?
Right. Did the lines between fact and fiction blur for you? And I guess what I'm asking is, when you begin writing, and that when it becomes when you kind of go off the outline and the story becomes alive and you can actually picture these people in this real place, did that happen for you?
You bet. My characters were so real. They have flesh and blood, and they didn't really talk to me in my dreams, but I could see them, feel them, and I had them interact with real people as well. There was no problem doing that at all, or no difficulty making that transition. My characters are full-bodied, and I know their motivations, I know their weaknesses, their passions, and they just took their place in that story very solidly.
Who was your favorite character to write in this book, Christie?
Oh, it's Woodrow, my Mayan art expert. He just once I introduced him, he just would not stop talking to me or talking in the story. It was hard. It was really difficult to sometimes to not let him take over, but and actually he, as you may know, he had a friend, a man who befriended him on the island, sometimes as side characters, and again, fictional. The side characters can also take a place in the center. But so Woodrow and his friend Rosie, who was a giant at the gate, what they called the gateway, which was the carnival zone. The two of them together, which once I got them in a scene together, they were magnificent.
Christie, you've mentioned the Mayan architecture before, and of course this character that brings that thread to the story. What is it about the Mayan architecture? Where did that come from, and why was it so integral to the place and then now to the story?
Well, but you had mentioned before a noir quality,
right?
Which so the architecture, they have what they call the elephant gates, which are in the front of the cover, and I guess there isn't a photo inside the book of them, but these incredible elephant gates that rose high into the sky, and one would walk through these baffles to get into the fair because there was so much wind. But there are those gates, and there was an exotic quality to them, an otherworldly quality. And I have Woodrow there at night as well as Lily several times at night. And by the way, the lighting of the island was unbelievable. General Electric spent over $1 million to install this indirect lighting that shined up on the walls of these buildings and these structures, and the walls had mica in them, and lights were colored, and so the lighting would just change. So the Mayan architecture, along with the Cambodian and the Art Deco, and the scale of these buildings, it lent itself to mysterious qualities that I found very alluring, and when there was danger, which there is in the story, to put my characters moving amongst those buildings was I loved doing that. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I don't want to, if we dig much deeper, we're going to give away too much of the book.
Okay.
And I really want people to go out and pick up a copy of this. The book is called Beautiful Illusion, Treasure Island 1939. It's out today. I highly recommend all of you, if you are interested in well, first, it's a fantastic story, and you just might learn something about a time and a place that has all but been forgotten, except for Christie Nelson's wonderful book. Christie, if people are just learning about you or not familiar with you, where can they find out about your work and follow you online?
I have a website, which is www.christienelson.com. The other thing about my website is I traveled for 3 months last year, and so I have a blog there, but all the information about Beautiful Illusion is on my website, and it's available at all bookstores, my favorite bookstores, of course, being the independent one. It's available online as well. So I'm so happy to talk to you today, Hank, and I feel that everyone who's interested in a bit of the past, interested in the conflict that was going on at that time, and yet the wonderful sense of promise and hope, to pick up a copy of Beautiful Illusion.
Absolutely. We highly recommend it. There's a link to it in the show notes where you can pick up a copy and follow Christie online. Christie, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason yanked the coils of safety rope to one shoulder and heaved them out the attic window. The bundle bounced over the roofline and dropped to the yard below. He tightened the harness, making sure the shoulder straps were snug over his sweatshirt. He threaded his rope through the braking device, tested it, and clipped everything to the carabiner at his navel. So far, so good. Fireman Mike would be proud. His stomach flipped as he neared the octagonal window. Had he tied the correct knots? Would he get himself killed? Weeks had passed since Mike's tutorial, but he had to attempt the break-in now, while both Van Brunts were at the Christmas Eve service. He swung his legs through the window and felt for the roof. His sneakers gripped the shingles and he wriggled out, grateful for once to have feet as big as snowshoes. He pulled on a ski mask and sang, "Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can." He lowered his body. Wind punched him in the jaw like a supervillain, surprising him. His sweatshirt rode up and snow burrowed into his navel. He looked down but couldn't see his feet. He relaxed his hands and put a few ounces of weight on the rope. Clots of snow broke away, dove over the edge, and took far too long to hit ground. He drew his rope around the pipe and pulled tight. Now he could drop. No, you will not drop. You will rappel. You will rappel very safely. He backed towards the edge, towards the point of no return. The backyard lurched into view. It was a 4-story fall, and he'd probably hit the stairs on the way down. He sledded helplessly. His legs fell, swung, and kicked the side of the house. Alarm bells went off in his head. He gripped the rope. It looked like nothing. A shoelace. "Jason Crane, you're a damn fool." He went limp and fell over. The rope gave a jolt, and the harness tried to castrate him. He twisted, trying to save his poor descendants. He began to spin. His arm bashed through a row of icicles. The spin slowed, reversed, and at last he came to a stop with his back to the house, dangling over the backyard. "Thank you, rope. That's a good rope. Well done." He tried to turn around, but couldn't. With patience, he worked out a method of kicking in circles and managed to press his sneakers to the side of the house. He needed slack. He gathered his loose rope to the small of his back and disengaged the brake. Zip! He fell fast, all his weight on the rope now. His feet, planted, shot up over his head. The brake caught him, and the rope vibrated as wildly as a guitar string striking a note of panic. Jason heard a crunching sound and looked up. The leaf gutter crumpled and poured a stream of bitter ice water into his eyes. He snarled and wiped his face, dripping humiliation. Jason rested a moment and stared at his reflection in the glass. He was an enormous Macy's balloon drifting over New Jersey, tethered at the navel like underdog. "How the hell did you get up here, kid?" He did an awkward split, 1 foot above the window and the other below, hanging sideways with his weight on one hip. He closed his eyes and reached for the sill, crouching against the side of the house. His fingernails found the weather stripping, and he tugged. Locked. He cursed and tugged again, anger rising. He grabbed the frame with both hands and pulled with all his spider strength. Something popped. The window rose and the curtains splashed out. Jason dove headfirst into the fabric, wriggled and kicked, let out some rope and fell with a whump into his archenemy's lair.